The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
On behalf of RBCS and software test professionals, welcome to today's webinar on Agile testing in the real world. I'm Rex Black, president of RBCS. We're a worldwide testing and QA firm. We serve clients that range from small startups to Fortune 20 global enterprises. Since 1994, we've delivered insight and confidence to hundreds of clients around the world. We have a team of international consultants that deliver customized training, consulting, and outsourcing services for companies that are looking to improve their test and quality assurance practices. I'm the author of 11 books on software testing, including the best-selling Managing the Testing Process, 4 books on the ISTQB program, and some new ebooks, Testing Metrics, Improving the Testing Process, and Improving the Software Process. We're presenting this webinar in partnership with Software Test Professionals. Check out their website at www.softwaretestpro.com. Excuse me, a little bit of a cough today. Attending today's webinar may earn you credit for QAI and or ASQ recertification, so check with QAI or ASQ to see how to qualify. Typically that's going to involve saving the attendee email that you'll receive after this webinar. Attendance at today's webinar earns PMI PDUs. Thank you, Linda Thorne, for reviewing the material and making valuable suggestions. Attendees will receive an email which will tell you how to claim the PDUs, and that will include the PDU code. RBCS's provider ID is 2986. Please note that the PDUs are available for live webinar attendance only. Before we start, a couple housekeeping notes. If you have any questions, you can submit them at any time via the webinar interface, but please note that I can only answer them at the end. There's no need to ask for presentation copies. The presentation is on the web at rbcs-us.com. Navigate to the resource tab in the upper middle of the screen and pull that down, and then navigate from there to the basic library, and you'll find the PDF copy of the presentation. Also, you were automatically registered for the free e-learning just by attending. It's free e-learning drawing, so check your email over the next couple days and watch the spam filter. You might be the lucky winner. If you're having problems with the audio or visual components of the webinar, please contact GoToWebinar support. Problems are usually related to browser incompatibility with GoToWebinar, so try another browser. Company firewalls, which you just have to get the company to allow Java downloads. That's required for GoToWebinar. Or audio settings on your PC. So if the audio sounds funny, open the audio settings on your PC and see what's happening with that. I hope you enjoy this free webinar from RBCS. We do these as a service to the software testing community because at RBCS we are a not-just-for-profit company. Okay, so I'm sorry. Something very odd happened there. Pardon me. Citrix software has been acting up today. In addition to what it just did of pausing the screen sharing for no apparent reason, it also disconnected the call right before the webinar started. I'm not sure how many of you were affected by that, but apologies if you were. So today's presentation, Agile Testing in the Real World. And there are lots of books and articles and webinars and so forth that talk about Agile and how good it can be. And one of the things that I've noticed in listening to a lot of those kinds of talks and conferences and perusing some of these articles and so forth is that there's a lot of focus on the quote-unquote right way to do it, and this is what you'll get if you do it the right way. Well, that's great, and we have seen some of our clients that are following the whole Agile manifesto fairly closely, but I'd say that most of our clients that are using Agile methods are not doing them in a pure fashion. They're adapting them either deliberately or in some cases sort of by accident, modifying them without necessarily thinking about what the consequences of those modifications would be. So some of this works, and we'll look at some examples today of what can work, and also we'll talk about some things that can go wrong. In terms of how this would affect both testing and also quality in general. So First, just to make sure that we're all sort of talking about the same thing, let me get the highlighter here. Okay, so what I'm talking about here in Agile development is that you have a series of sprints or iterations that are used to develop the software. Each sprint or iteration is anywhere from 2 to 4 weeks long. At the beginning of each sprint, there's a definition of the user stories to be created in that sprint, or a refinement of them if they were already floating around. And if you're doing risk-based testing, another thing that would happen at this beginning period, which I've not shown here but would be right here, would be your risk analysis from a point of view of for the user stories that were identified, what are the risks. And then what's going to happen is the programmers are going to go off and work on their user stories and going to write the code. Ideally, that code would be reviewed in some way or another. Now, one way that this is sometimes accomplished is via pair programming for those organizations that are using XP or extreme programming. You tend to see that. Other organizations, they're not using XP, they're just using Scrum from a management point of view. And so there'd be code is written, code is reviewed. So it says that they're using pair programming, that's happening simultaneously. Unit testing happens. That also is typically happening simultaneously, especially if there's test first development, or behavior-driven development is sometimes now called. And then once the code has reached some level of stability, there's a functional verification test, which is maybe using some kind of automated tool to verify the user story is satisfied. Now, while this is going on, the code is being checked into the repository, and the continuous integration is occurring, and the unit tests ideally are also getting checked into that continuous integration framework and being rerun on a regular basis. Some of our clients, this will be nightly. Some of them it's more periodic than that. Some of them it's more rapid than that. Some of them it's every few hours. But a lot of our clients find that once you've built up a significant mass of automated unit tests, that it takes more than just a few hours to run them, and it's the kind of thing that does need to be done overnight. There are some ways of kind of dealing with that through parallelization and so forth, but a lot of our clients are finding that kind of challenging. And then towards the end, there is an acceptance test that gets run, and this is basically somewhat different than what's meant in, say, the ISTQB terminology by acceptance test, because this refers to the business stakeholder, or in some cases the business stakeholder surrogate, looking at the behavior of the code that implements the user story and saying, yeah, that's what I meant, or no, that's not what I meant, go back and fix it. Some of our clients, a lot of our clients, this is sort of something that happens, in the final days of a sprint. They're kind of in this acceptance test mode. And then, assuming that there's time left for another sprint, then we do it again. If we've reached the end of the available time, then no, we would go ahead and deliver. Now, theoretically, anything, the end result of any one of the sprints can be delivered to the customer, because it's supposed to be fully running, fully tested software. Now, most of our clients don't actually do that. They're not actually going to deliver it at the end of each sprint, though some of them do. For the most part, it's the sprints are continuously dropping code out and into some sort of pre-production or staging environment, and then that's released into the production environment in a more deliberate fashion. And I'll take a look at some examples of that a little later. Okay, so excuse me. So Agile, what is Agile not? I think this is a good thing to touch on, because this is something that Agile advocates are hammer on so heavily of, waterfall, often with sort of mocking derision. But basically, the Agile is the opposite of a sequential lifecycle model. So in the sequential lifecycle model, all of the activities and work products associated with a given phase are completed before the next phase's activities begin. That's what makes it sequential. So you define all of the requirements first. The requirements go through some sort of review and approval process, and then you design a system that will meet those requirements. Design specification goes through a review and approval, and the system is implemented. And then there are ascending levels of testing that go on. Usually these are, even in organizations that are pretty committed to sequential approach, generally there will be some significant amount of overlap, at least between the unit test and the integration test. And sometimes also system testing will start before the integration testing is complete. I've certainly seen that. And of course, sometimes the component integration doesn't happen, but now we're getting off into the, are they really doing it right land? That sequential life cycle done properly would look like this. The planning, analysis, design, implementation of the tests for each level would start at the earliest possible moment. So the requirements are a primary point of reference for system tests. Then as soon as we have draft requirement specifications, we can start to analyze those to identify risks and test conditions and design tests to cover those conditions. And that can have the action of identifying defects in those documents. That's why I'm showing this as a double-headed arrow, so there's a flow in both directions. And similar for the lower levels of testing, it's just that they have different primary points of reference. Now, so this is not Agile. I mean, this is not at all Agile. Which it's not to say that it can't be done in an effective way. And I've certainly seen projects where people did follow these sequential lifecycle models, and if you follow the rules right and you're smart about it, you can use it to successfully create software. I think a lot of the criticisms that get hurled at the waterfall models by people who are Agile advocates actually have to do with organizations that are doing it wrong effectively. They're not following the rules. So just as much as if an organization is not following the rules of Agile, they can't expect to get the benefits of Agile. It's the same with sequential. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. Now, Agile comes with a lot of goodies, and this is one big attraction to it. Now, you don't have to be doing Agile to use these things, but they are certainly closely associated with Agile. So you've got the various X-unit frameworks for unit testing, JUnit, CPP unit, and so forth. You have Jenkins for continuous integration framework, Cucumber for automated testing, Ruby for scripting and in some cases testing, Selenium, Fitness for functional verification tests of various kinds. You've got static code analysis tools. I like the one here. Somebody mentioned to me crap4j. That's a Java code analysis tool. So obviously looking for crap. There's code coverage tools, and this code analysis and code coverage can be integrated into the continuous integration and the unit testing. So there's all sorts of fun stuff. Now, some of this can be problematic. Now, I have nothing against Jira and Rally and their tool sets, but there's a sort of give the kid a hammer and the whole world becomes a nail problem with those, in the sense that based on what our clients have told us, those tools are clearly not designed to meet the needs of testers. They're primarily designed from an agile development point of view. Yet what ends up happening is a lot of our clients try to shoehorn bug management and test management tasks into those. And I'm not sure why that became a commonly accepted quote-unquote good idea, but it has, and you know, we've seen a number of issues with clients with this. For example, Jira, the whole workflow is just really not something that's easily adaptable for a proper defect management workflow. You know, classification information is more that's being gathered is appropriate for tasks, but not for defects. So you end up losing a lot of classification information on the defects, which results in an inability to make smart process improvement decisions. So it can be kind of a problem, and it's something that you need to be aware of. Again, no offense to Jira and Rally tools being used for what they are intended to be used for, but attempting to use them as test management tools has been problematic. Okay, metrics. So Agile, especially when people do what's referred to as lean Agile, tends to be pretty lightweight with respect to metrics. So there is usually some measurement of tests completed, though whether this is gathered in a way which can be subjected to automated analysis it's sort of a different question. It's often not. Sometimes it is. Sometimes it's not. If an organization is doing risk-based testing, then it is possible, and some of our clients do this, to gather metrics on the risks that have been addressed by the testing, and which ones are passing and which ones are failing. The old standby of bugs found and fixed is something that some of our clients are looking at. Now, this can be a source of problems, of concerns, because we've had a number of organizations, again, ones that are following this lean approach to Agile, that say, don't document defects that are found during a sprint. Only document a defect if it's not going to be fixed in the current sprint. Now, the argument that's made for this is that that record keeping, it slows us down, and you shouldn't be distracting yourself from the immediate problem and fixing it by documenting it. The thing I think that loses sight of is that there are a number of information needs that are served by defect reports, and one of them is indeed the immediate tactical need to manage the defect from discovery through to resolution. And that can be handled in any number of ways, and it doesn't necessarily have to be a bug report filed in a bug tracking system to do that. It's not necessarily the most efficient way to do it, but there are ways short of filing a bug report, and I can see how, given some of the implementations of bug reporting systems that I've seen that can be pretty heavyweight, I can see how people would say, well, we don't want someone spending 15 minutes documenting the bug. We want them to spend that time fixing it. The trouble, though, is now that these two other information uses of metrics are lost if you don't have if you don't have the bugs reported. So one of those is the need to be able to aggregate the defect metrics and make some smart decisions based on those defect metrics of what's going on the project. Like, for example, it's possible that the defect metrics, if you were gathering them, would be telling you, hey, guess what? There is a bunch of bugs in this one area of the product. There's a big bug cluster over here, and you really need to get in there and fix that. if the whole focus is on this immediate tactical fix bugs, fix bugs, fix bugs, there's no data gathered. You can't see that pattern emerge, and then you can't fix it. Excuse me. The other thing that's lost is the ability to make long-term process improvement decisions based on patterns in the defects. So, for example, let's say that the developers are introducing a lot of security-related defects into the code. Now, you could do an analysis of that over time, over some set of sprints, and say, well, we've got a lot of security-related defects are being introduced into the code, and we really need to train the developers to write better code, to not do this, not put these security-related defects in. And that's just one example. I mean, there are plenty of process improvement opportunities that can be identified by taking a close look at your defect information. But if you don't have it captured, and you can't see that. So I think it's a pretty significant loss of visibility, and this is something that I would encourage you to debate within your organization if there's some discussion about, oh, we're not going to track defects anymore because it's a waste of time. You might, maybe if you've got defect tracking information from previous projects, you might go back and do some analysis and come out and say, look at all these interesting things that we can learn from defect reports, but only if we gather them. Another metric, and this is a fairly common one in Agile organizations, is the sprint velocity, which is basically the number of user stories that are completed. Though it's weighted by the number of story points that are associated with the user story. So this is, how many story points can we get through in a sprint? Now, the important thing about tracking this is to recognize the true inherent velocity of the sprint team and to plan based on that. And some organizations are better at doing this than others. Now, Agile life cycles create a number of challenges and opportunities for testing. Now, I've given presentations on both of these, Agile testing challenges and Agile testing opportunities. Both of those are available as recorded webinars. So if you go to the resources tab again on the RBCS website and navigate to the digital library, you can find recordings of those two webinars, Agile testing challenges and Agile testing opportunities, where I explain these in detail. But at a high level, things that often are challenging to organizations from a test point of view, the volume of change and the speed of change can be rapid and can overwhelm the test team's ability to keep up, especially if it's not the change is not being managed effectively and communicated effectively. Short iterations, there are certain tasks that need to be done outside of the iterations, but sometimes time is not allocated for that. So that can create problems. Increasing regression risk that's not adequately managed. Because the code is changing very frequently, then the regression risk tends to go up. And if that's not managed properly, then that can create a problem. While unit testing is an inherent part of the Agile approach, we've certainly seen a number of cases with clients where some of the developers are doing it, some are not. In some cases, very few of the developers are doing it. The unit testing is entirely inadequate. Excuse me. So that can be a real problem. You end up getting code that's not very well tested and it's full of defects. And it's one thing when that happens and you've got a 2-month system test period scheduled. It's a whole different thing if you're down to the last week of a 2-week sprint and you're trying to whip the bugs out of code in that period. Difficulty figuring out what the expected results of a test are. Sort of inadequate communication with people about what what the system is supposed to do under certain conditions, and then sometimes that changes. And we've seen situations where testers don't really know if the test has passed or failed, and since there's no defect reporting in place, sometimes that results in the poor tester kind of wandering around trying to get clarification, and it can be very problematic. Related to the speed of change, this shifting test basis of the issue of what needs to be covered in testing can change, and again, if that's not communicated effectively, that results in testers kind of getting lost and testing the wrong things. Meeting overload is in reference to, there's supposed to be this sort of daily stand-up meeting that happens, and it's supposed to be short. That's why it's a stand-up meeting. But we've seen some of our clients that it's not a daily stand-up, it's a daily sit-down, and it's a sit-down for like 2 hours. That can be a pretty significant amount of overhead. Now, that can happen, of course, with any life cycle, but we have seen this happen with Agile in some cases. A fairly frequent problem is overcommitment, a failure to recognize what the team's true velocity is, and thus a tendency to overcommit, and often it's pressure from management from outside. Theoretically, the Agile teams are supposed to be self-directing, and they're supposed to be able to figure out what they could actually do and do that, but in many cases what we've seen is, well, maybe not many cases, but a number of cases, we've seen a tendency for the Agile teams to be pushed to overcommit with respect to the number of stories they're going to get done in a given sprint. And then what happens when they don't get done, or they get partly done, is you get to the end of the sprint, and then the poor testers are getting hammered to try to get everything done test-wise. We had a client talk about how they were on 4-week sprints, and the testers were like, yeah, every fourth weekend we have to spend Saturday and Sunday in here finishing up the testing, because what came to us was by no means done in a lot of cases, because people were trying to get 10 pounds in a 5-pound bucket. Excuse me. Now, siloing of the sprint teams. This happens on larger projects where there are multiple sprint teams that are working in parallel, and what this refers to is that they're supposed to be building stuff that's going to work together, but there's not always a good centripetal force basically pulling the teams into one. Now, there are some theories about how to do that through what's sometimes referred to as scrum of scrums and so forth, but it, again, doesn't always happen. And then finally, another challenge here is the Gartner Group's hype cycle applies, of course, to anything, and Agile right now is sort of the flavor of the month, and there are very high expectations about what can be achieved with it. Organizations expect sort of instant miracles, and in spite of the fact that it obviously takes some time to mature any software process, and so it's something that can be a challenge for the tester, because the tester is sometimes the one who's pointing out, well, actually the quality hasn't gotten any better, and actually because of the rate of change, our test coverage has gone down, so your risks are going up, and sometimes the tester is the one sort of calling out that the emperor has no clothes, effectively, that the implementation of Agile in the organization is unlikely to produce the desired result, at least without changing the way it's being implemented. So again, more on this on that recorded webinar if you're curious. Now, so those were the challenges. So, what are the testing opportunities that are created by Agile? Well, there are plenty of those. Automated unit testing, the frameworks that can be used to create the automated unit tests, definitely very helpful for us in testing if it's done, if they're used and it's exploited to their full benefit. Static code analysis also can significantly improve the quality of the code, and if it's used by the developers conjunction with the automated unit testing, then that definitely is another plus in terms of cleaning the code up. Code coverage analysis, again, in conjunction with the automated unit testing, a way of making sure that the developers achieve a high level of code coverage. So all those things work in concert to reduce the number of defects delivered to us in testing. Continuous integration is definitely helpful because it reduces the likelihood of a bad build or uninstallable test release being delivered into the test team. So that's definitely can help. There are various automated functional test tools. I mentioned like Selenium that can be very useful to testers and can be integrated together with the other automated unit testing that's being done. And that's definitely further help with managing the regression risk, for example. Properly done, the requirements, which are user stories in Agile, will be subjected to reviews, and the tests in the form of the acceptance criteria will also be subjected to reviews, and this goes a long way to making sure we all agree on what should be built and what it should do. Reasonable workload for those organizations that do actually look at their velocity and plan based on the velocity, and then control of technical debt. If the organization has what's referred to as a fix bugs first approach, this limits the amount of technical debt that can accumulate. Fix bugs first refers to if a sprint starts and there are any bugs that are left over or discovered, that those take precedence over adding new functionality. So we don't ever get to a point where we have sort of out of control technical debt. Now, in organizations, even organizations that don't have that fix bugs first philosophy, one of the ways that this is sometimes dealt with is by using what are called hardening sprints, where the focus is just on improving quality and performance and so forth. Now, so hardening sprints are somewhat anathema to some of the purists, the Agile purists, but a number of our clients do use them and use them successfully. Okay, so there's Agile, and then there's Agile-ish, and some of our clients are more in the Agile-ish world. So let's look at some examples of that. Pardon me, some sort of cold or something from a week it seemed like more on airplanes than off of them. So this particular client, they have a 7-week release schedule, as you see here. And what's happening is that there is planning, development, and testing that are going on, and they're going on in overlapping fashion. They refer to this as the train life cycle because basically the train leaves the station and it always arrives, that's the end of the 7-week period. It's not delayed. There are releases every 3 weeks. Will be happening, and I'm not showing the release here that would happen at week 1, but we've got a release here at week 4. Release at week 7, and so we've got overlapping. There's planning, where we're going to scope out. That's the first part of the life cycle. Scope what we're going to build, and then once that's frozen, then there's development. The development freezes, and then there's a test period, and then when the testing is done, that's the release. And then notice that development for release N is happening while testing for release N-1 is happening, and planning for release N+1 is happening. So I think a lot of people would look at this, Agile purists would look at this and say, well, that's definitely not Agile. That's some sort of iterative waterfall kind of thing. It looks more like RUP maybe to people than Agile. But these guys have incorporated a lot of Agile ideas into their life cycle, and it's Agile-ish without a doubt. I mean, talking to people there and looking at the practices, there's a lot of stuff that that you would recognize as being Agile. So, you know, it's a pragmatic adaptation of the Agile concepts for this particular organization, which is in the business of rapidly developing features and putting them on their website, which is the tool that they use to generate business. They use the website to allow their customers to design and create various products. Now, the other example here of Agile-ish that I want to mention here is one of our clients. They have, well, a number of our clients have this. They have a fairly complex system of systems in their data center. Most large organizations do have that. They've got a lot of applications that need to interoperate or at least cohabitate. Some of the development in this organization is being done via an Agile approach. We see shown up there is the Agile stuff going on, but then and there's also other development that's happening with a more sequential type of approach. The Agile stuff is dropping. Let me get a highlighter going here. The Agile stuff is dropping into the system integration test process at the end of each iteration. And these guys do have a stabilization sprint at the end for the last iteration prior to release. They don't go into production. They're going into system integration test. So in the stabilization period, they'll be dropping bug fixes throughout the process. And as I said, there's other projects that might be following a sequential lifecycle model that would be potentially dropping in code along the way. So that would also be happening. Now, while that's happening, automated regression tests are being created, and they're going to be delivered on an ongoing basis during the system integration testing. You know, as ready, basically. And then there's performance testing that's happening. Now, that's usually some amount of the system integration testing is done first before the performance testing starts. On the theory that you want to stabilize the system before you start doing performance tests. Now, I've got my own set of concerns about that we could talk about in another webinar, but this is the way they do it. And then at the end of the system integration test, of the performance test, you see that we've got an operational acceptance test by the operators, making sure that the software will be operable in the production environment. And then there's a user acceptance test where the users are coming in and looking at what's been built. And then that all goes well. Then the software is ready to be promoted into production. So, what we see here is a mix of stuff that would definitely fit in classic waterfall, but also is being adapted in a way to accommodate Agile. So, is it Agile or is it not? Purists might say, no, it's not Agile, but certainly this organization is happy with the way that works. And then here's another example of a client of ours. They build customized enterprise software for banks. And what happens is that there's a whole collection of systems that are built, and each system consists of various components. Excuse me. So I'll get the highlighter up here again. So the what will happen is that a component will be built in a series of iterations, right? And then when those components are completed, in other words, all the user stories that make up the component are completed, then those get integrated together and they go through an integration test. The same thing's happening down here with System 2. Now, of course, this is bigger. There's not just two components. This is bigger than what's shown here. This is for purposes of illustration. So then when all the systems are done, then there's a integration of those systems and followed by a system integration test. And then basically the product is ready to go. But the thing about that is that it's, well, yes, its product is ready to go. That's in its generic form, but every client needs to have customized implementations because it works somewhat differently for each client. So as software is delivered to customers, they go through their own separate customization process, which includes a system test and often other earlier levels of testing too, and then an acceptance test followed at the end. And this whole period is, it's being shown on the slide here, is something that plays out over a year, maybe even 2 years, from the point at which a particular component is being created and tested here to where it's actually being accepted by a client. So notice that there is Agile stuff going on here, but also there's stuff that's still more sequential. Now, one of the controversies that you'll run into with Agile is, can you do Agile in a situation where there's outsourcing? Now, I was at a conference in Kiev back last year, and Alistair Coburn was there, and he said, no, you can't do that. Well, basically, he said you have to have co-location. Everybody on the team has to be in the same place and able to communicate with each other in real time, because otherwise it's not really Agile. Now, that said, we do have a lot of clients that do outsource testing and development, and some of those clients are trying to use Agile. There's varying degrees of success here. Some of them are being able to put a lot of the Agile concepts into play and get some benefit out of it, and others are finding that they can't, though that's not always because of the outsourcing. Outsourcing is not always the main impediment. One of the things that does seem to be essential in these outsourced Agile projects is that there be an on-site point of contact. So the offshore team could be, wherever, India, Eastern Europe, what have you. The work could be done in Western Europe or the United States. There needs to be somebody who's at the site where the client site, basically, acting as that point of contact and carrying the communications back and forth. Now, again, I think some people would say, no, that's not Agile, but as much of Agile as can be done is being done, and so there's sort of this, well, at what point are you allowed to call things Agile, and what would it even mean to be allowed to call things Agile? I mean, can't people call something Agile if they want to, regardless of whether some particular expert says no, it's not Agile because this is missing or that is missing. Now, pardon me, my throat is killing me here. Agile has some fairly significant tester skill implications, and what we've seen definitely in the United States in organizations that are adopting Agile is that the expectation is that, and the requirement is that the tester will have to have programming skills. And that does now seem to be rippling out worldwide. I'm hearing more and more stories of that. And it's not always just Agile. I mean, it's non-Agile projects. I think more and more the expectation is that testers should be able to program and to use these various automated testing tools that are available. So programming skill is important, but it's also, I think, important to keep in mind that automation, especially functional test automation of the graphical user interface, is a pretty specialized skill and requires a lot of experience to really master it. So, we would recommend that you're bringing people on into an Agile team and wanting them to be able to be effective at automation. Don't just assume, oh, well, they know how to program, therefore they will know how to automate. Ran into this with a client a couple years ago, and yeah, they were just sort of making this assumption, oh, well, we'll bring people in, and smart kids out of college basically who have programming skills, and they'll be able to do all the automation. And it didn't work too well. You ended up having what you would expect, which is a lot of maintenance problems with their automated tests. Now, personality is also a factor here. I think Agile is really plays very much into the extrovert personality, because there's this things in the Agile Manifesto, such as to value face-to-face communication as the best way of transmitting information, and working software is better than complete specification. So there tends to be sort of a de-emphasis of analysis. And analysis is a sort of solitary task in many ways. Excuse me. What's happening in Agile is typically not. It's not so much of that solitary analysis. Now, unfortunately, introverts are generally very good at that sort of solitary analytical kind of work, and find it difficult in some cases to work in a team that's sort of dominated by extroverts. And I've actually been to conferences where this was a major theme of discussion of what's how if you're an introvert, how do you work effectively within a Agile team. So something to consider if you are an introvert and your organization is going towards Agile. That's going to have some implications for you in terms of work habits. Now, how to organize test teams in Agile environment. There are various options that we've seen, some working better than others. There's the embedded, there's the independent, and there's the matrixed. So let's look at them. So fully embedded, what you're going to have is you're going to have a dedicated tester that is part of the sprint team, as we see here, and that's what they do. They are working on testing the code in the sprint. Now, some people like this. They say, well, this is great because the tester's part of this self-directed team and working side by side with the other people in the sprint team to try to enable producing a high-quality deliverable, etc. The trouble with this is that you don't have any sort of independence here, and there's no real clear channel for the tester to escalate concerns that he or she might have about what's going on in the project or quality implications thereof, and so forth. So this is not one that I would recommend. Now, the fully independent model here is something that we've also seen clients do, where there's an independent test team, And what happens is that when a sprint is ready for testing, when it's getting into the acceptance test phase, then testers are assigned to come in and perform that. This definitely has been reported as very problematic by our clients that are trying to do it, because what ends up happening is that the poor tester gets thrown in there at the end. They're not really part of the team. They're not seen as part of the team. They don't really know what's going on. They have to come up to speed very, very quickly because they've got very little time to do their testing. And yeah, it's independent, but it's also sort of disconnected from the overall Agile approach. And typically, this also results in the testers being pretty heavily overutilized in situations where we've seen it done. It's definitely not something that I would recommend. Then we have matrixed, which this is something that I think works. I've seen it work. So what you do here is that there's an independent test group, and the testers are part of it, and they are assigned to work within the sprint teams, but they also continue to be part of this independent team, and there is an escalation path if things are kind of not going well. There's an expectation that the test manager is going to track and report the overall health of all of the sprints, and also the test manager has some out of sprint activities going on, as you see here, for those things that really don't fit well within a given sprint or sequence of sprints. So, for example, automation, creating automated testing frameworks. That's something that tends to have a longer time frame than 2-week sprint. Creation of test data is something else that can be sort of a longer term activity, and is something that needs to be done outside of a sprint. Okay, so what can we say, if anything, about Agile and quality? Is Agile going to improve quality? Well, certainly the advocates of Agile are strong in their assertion that Agile will result in greater quality. But there's limited data. Now, yesterday somebody recommended that I look at a book. I can't remember the name of it. It's Kanban and Kanban something. And then so I got it in my notes to take a look at that book. And he had said that it has some data on organizations that have switched to Agile and seen quality improve. And it'll be interesting to see what that is. Excuse me, that data and what it says. There's part of the challenge of figuring this out and what the effect of Agile on quality is what's referred to as the Hawthorne effect. And you can find plenty of this on the internet if you take a look. And the Hawthorne effect basically says that if people are aware, if workers are aware that something is being paid attention to, then they will also pay attention to it and do it better. So, to what extent is it possible that anecdotes about improved quality in organizations that switch to Agile are Hawthorne effects, which tend to be temporary, versus longer-lasting effects? And the time will tell. Certainly, there's lots of stuff that is promising. There are many long-proven best practices got incorporated into Agile. I think it's probably fair to say that if you go through and look at the best practices of Agile, that most, if not all, of those can be traced to known best practices that preceded Agile. But be that as it may, I mean, where they came from, I mean, good ideas are good ideas, and if they're in place, then that's great. The thing that worries me, as I mentioned before, is if we've got less measurement going on, less tracking of defects, I think it's going to be difficult to really make a strong empirical case that that quality has improved and that things are better with Agile. So, you know, I think this is something that needs to be studied, it needs to be looked at closely. It's a certain amount of what I refer to as proof by assertion, of people just insisting vehemently that indeed Agile does result in higher quality. I don't think that vehement insistence is proof. Like, what we need is some facts. We need an objective discussion, and need to see how this plays out over time. All right, so conclusions here. Looked at ways that Agile life cycles are different from a sequential life cycle, and how that affects testing and quality. Various tools are available, and benefits that we can get from those. There are a lot of tools that are out there and that can be used, and these can be used, as I've said, in either Agile or non-Agile types of settings. Metrics, I think, are a concern with Agile. Some organizations are, I think, taking a step backwards when they adopt Agile, and they're measuring less, which is going to result in lower visibility, which I think is really unfortunate. So hopefully that will not that trend will not go forward, but people will stop and go, you know, I actually do need to gather metrics. There are various challenges and opportunities that are created by an Agile life cycle, and I'd encourage you, if you want more details on what I covered in those two slides, that you go out to the digital library, listen to the recorded webinar, and webinars. There are two of them, and maybe do some thinking about those challenges and opportunities, how to handle the challenges and how to exploit the opportunities. Agile is really not one thing, but it's a family of things that share common denominators, and there are also some folks out there that have implemented stuff that Agile purists would definitely not consider Agile, but that nonetheless is working successfully for the organization. So you know, definitely something to keep in mind. You don't want to necessarily be a purist about this. What you want is a pragmatic approach. That said, you have to be careful when you're tailoring the Agile implementations, because we've seen clients that sort of threw out stuff that they didn't like about Agile, not realizing that the things they were throwing out were enablers of some of the things that they wanted. We talked about outsourcing a bit, and something to keep in mind is outsourcing of Agile projects. Is that something possible? Some say no, some say yes, but certainly there's no lack of trying on this. Keep in mind that the skills required are different if you're working in an Agile life cycle. You do need to have testers that are more technical, more technically oriented, with experience in programming and test automation. So that trend is going to continue to play out, and has been for years, but it's now accelerated. If you're a test manager, think about your different organizational options very carefully. You know, again, there's a couple models that we've seen: the fully embedded and the fully independent, that don't seem to work too well. The matrix model does seem to work when properly implemented. And then finally, you know, over the next few years, we'll just have to kind of watch and see how Agile impacts quality. There's certainly very promising anecdotal reports, and it'll be interesting to see over the years if we actually get some more data to sort of substantiate some of these reports. Okay, so that's the presentation proper, and at this point I'm going to go ahead and fire up the QA question and answer panel here. Start working through some of these questions, which we already have a lot. The question is something about, my session just died telling me that the webinar is finished, but it's about to start now, right? Yeah, that's Yeah, Dirk, that I don't know what exactly happened there. It was very strange, but it apparently is fixed. John asks, what is the audio access code? I'm not aware of what that is, John. I'm assuming since you're still online that you were able to access the audio. Send me an email to let me know what the problems are. Let's see. I got a couple comments here saying that the volume was kind of fading in and out. Apologies for that. I'm not sure what might have been happening there. I have a few comments like that. So apologies if there was a problem with the voice fading in and out. It could have been an internet connection speed problem. Hopefully it's something that's transient. So let's see. Karen says, what is a good code coverage tool? Oh, well, I'm racking my brain here for some of the ones that I've seen used in the Agile space, and unfortunately I'm coming up with a blank here. I think my cold is getting on top of me, but there are certainly a number of them. What I would recommend is that you start at sourceforge.net. There's a lot of good freeware stuff available out there, so that's something that I would say, take a look at sourceforge.net and see what you can get. A lot of these tools can be integrated into the automated unit testing frameworks, and that's definitely something that helps, because it allows the developers to have basically immediate real-time access to the code coverage metrics, and they can go, oh, I'm missing some stuff, and so we need to expand that. Let's see. Martin says, poor requirements are the bane of waterfall delivery, but can also impact Agile. Yeah, absolutely. What can QA do within Agile to ensure user stories and other forms of requirements are good enough to be successful? Well, ideally, those user stories are going through a review process, and the testers are involved in that review process. And if there are problems with the user stories from a practicality point of view, and is it implementable, is it testable, etc., that those things can be identified and resolved before the development starts. But yeah, I've definitely seen this situations where, and this gets to what I was talking about in terms of challenges. The user stories are not an adequate basis for testing, so you can't figure out what exactly to test, and can't figure out what the expected results would be, and so forth. So that's definitely a potential problem. And Martin's got a follow-on question here. He says, I'm seeing more projects using Jira for test management as well as other purposes. You mentioned the problems this can cause. Any specific suggestions on what we can do to either supplement Jira with other tools or improve Jira to provide the support we need? For example, as you mentioned, defect metrics and tracking. Well, I mean, certainly, there are ways to try to expand and customize the tool, and that's something that you can do, or you can use other tools. So we have one of our clients that is using Jira for their task management, but they use HP's Quality Center for their test management and defect management. I think people will probably tend to object to that in an Agile setting because it's more overhead, and they're not going to want that. So you probably better off trying to figure out ways of enhancing the tool that you're using so that it can do both. But definitely just pretending that something that was clearly designed for task management is also going to be equally good at managing defects, that's not going to work. There's all sorts of information that gets lost, and as I said, the workflow is not right. Jamie makes a comment here. One of the slides I was looking at, the Scrummer fall, would probably be this guy here. You could potentially consider Scrum or Fall or this one. Yeah, it's, purists would definitely not call it Agile, but it's, they don't care. They're perfectly happy with it, and it works for them. Excuse me. So Diego says, what level of testing documentation is expected to come from the testing team in an Agile world? Well, I mean, the short answer is less documentation. The idea is that things are lightweight, and that then has some significant implications from a skills point of view, because the testers are going to need to be more knowledgeable about the product and more able to figure out what the right thing is to happen in a given situation without necessarily having to rely on an extensively documented test script. So definitely trend towards lightweight documentation in Agile, and something that needs to be considered by test managers. Let's see. How would you recommend independent verification and validation testing be integrated with Agile? I'm not sure, Mark. I mean, I think it depends on what you mean by IV&V. If you're talking about IV&V in sort of a military sense, then I think that's different than if you're talking about IV&V in the sense of independent testing happening at the end of a life cycle. But I would guess that it could look something like this, where there's either periodic deliveries into an IV&V process here, that would be like the system integration testing, or alternatively, you have IV&V periodically parachuted into the iterations at the end of each iteration to take a look at what's been done. I suspect, though, that has some of the problems that I mentioned with respect to the fully independent organizational approach. Which is this guy here, that sort of on-demand thing that people get kind of pulled in multiple directions. Thomas has a question. Can you have the same person be the developer and the tester? Well, I mean, that you can. Of course, the developer should be testing their own code as part of a unit test. But the problem that you're going to have with the developer also being the tester is that you have independence issues, lack of independence that's happening, and the person testing their own work has what's called the author bias, which is this assumption that what they implemented is more or less correct, at least in terms of its design. They're not necessarily able to question their assumptions. So I think this is somewhat of a questionable approach. I mean, obviously, yes, developers should test their code, they should do unit testing, but I would not want to see a situation where all the testing that was going on in a sprint was being done by the developers basically testing their own code or each other's code. And Doug says, Agile has been around for at least 5 years now and still hasn't taken hold then, right? No, I mean, Agile has actually been around under that name. I first started hearing about Agile back in 1999. So it's, it's getting into its 14th year. Has it taken hold? I mean, certainly the advocates of Agile will say that it is definitely a mainstream methodology now, and certainly, we do run into it with a lot of our clients, but it's not the case that everybody does it, and it's also the case that some of our clients tried it and dropped it, decided not to do it anymore. So I don't know. The jury is still out in a lot of ways on this. What's in 2020? What's going to be the status with Agile? Don't know. Hard to say. I think the advocates of Agile will say everybody's going to be doing it, but I think that there's plenty of situations where Agile either doesn't fit or Agile by itself isn't enough. as we saw in some of those examples. Let's see, Daniel asks, will this be shared as an offline podcast too? Yes, it will. It's being recorded right now. It should be available shortly. I mean, pretty much all of our webinars are available as podcasts and as recorded videos. And the podcasts, you can sign up for those at iTunes, and then for the recorded videos, you can get those on YouTube. So this will be among them. Every now and then we get a problem with that, a problem with the recording, but this recording seems to be working, so I don't think we're going to have an issue. Let's see, Yvonne, what would be the first step to starting the Agile process? From a test perspective or from a Agile in general perspective, I guess it's different. I mean, if usually the test managers are not involved in the decision to go Agile or not. They might or might not be, but if you are involved in that decision making, then that's great. And, you need to make sure that you are going to be prepared, I guess would be the right word for that, as it's coming. If you're not involved in the decision, you're just told, hey, guess what? And our CIO went to a conference over the last week and drank the Agile Kool-Aid, and now we're all going to be doing Agile. Then you'll be in sort of a scramble mode where you're going to try to get yourself ramped up on Agile and how it works as quickly as possible. So, attend to the issues that I mentioned here, and look at how is Agile actually being implemented, and what does that mean from a test organization point of view, and how do I properly integrate my testing into an Agile lifecycle and so forth. Try to get ahead of the curve, and also I'd say that if the decision has been made to go Agile, there's really no value for the test manager resisting that. We've seen that in a few situations where the test managers sort of sit on the sidelines and throw stones and say this Agile stuff is stupid and it's never going to work. And all you basically do in that situation is define yourself as extraneous to a process change that's already been determined. And that defining yourself as extraneous as a test manager is certainly never a good thing. There's a question here about PDU code, and I'll just repeat that the PDU code will be in an attendee email that you'll receive shortly. So Rinku, be watching for that. John mentions that we have the code, so I'm guessing that maybe that attendee email already went out. That seems kind of odd. Erline says, great seminar as always. I value your comment on keeping metrics. Thank you for that. Good luck, Erline, keeping those metrics programs going. Deanna asks, can you recommend some resources for guidance in successfully implementing a matrixed model, which would be this guy here. I can't say that I've read any sort of formal discussions on that at this point. If you're looking, I mean, it depends on what you're looking for. If you're looking to sell this to management, I mean, then the key thing here is that this approach is going to allow you to maintain the benefits of independent testing while at the same time have testers working permanently within each sprint team. So you're not undermining the value of sprint approach, or the Agile approach. And you've got the capabilities to do things outside of the sprints that are going to take longer. So, I think it's from a sales point of view, it's something that you want to be able to advocate what it's going to allow you to do, basically the way that it's going to allow you to serve the project better. Linda says, what's the best way to learn automated testing? I do mostly manual testing and would like to learn the new techniques, but don't know where to start. Okay, so I'd say that where to start, one of the things that you should start is learn how to program, at the very least with a scripting language of some sort or another. There are plenty of Sorry, we got something came. Pardon me. Outlook just decided to interfere. Okay, I got Outlook killed off there. So learn how to program. At least learn scripting languages first. I would say that that's the good kind of first step. Once you've learned some programming skills, then you can start looking at some of the automated testing tools. There are classes available for some of the commercial ones, but I think for the freeware ones, what you need to do is just to start working with them. One of my colleagues that needed to learn automation as part of improving his skill set, what he did, and this is kind of difficult if you're currently employed, but excuse me, he was between jobs, and what he did is he went and did some volunteer testing work on a nonprofit that was using Agile techniques, and used that as an opportunity to sort of immerse himself in those techniques and automation and so forth, and pick those skills up, and that really worked out for him. He subsequent to that got a job where he was employing those skills and being paid to do it, basically, and that did pay off. It took him, I think, about 3 months to do that. Let's see, we've got a comment from Jason. He mentions Clover as a good code coverage tool, so that's maybe something to keep in mind. Kelly asks, are you supposed to get programmer release notes at the end of each sprint? That's not something that I've seen happening with most of our clients that are doing Agile, no. Ideally, what's going to happen is that you're going to be embedded within the team in some way or another, maybe not the fully embedded that I talked about before, maybe the more assigned like shown here. Whoops. And you're going to be involved in reviewing the user stories, so you're going to know what's being built before it's built, and you'll have a chance to comment on it. Now, those user stories could conceivably be used as release notes at the end of the sprints, but it's not something that I'm really familiar with, no. All right, so Janine asks, what are your thoughts on rational functional tester? Certainly a number of our clients are using that successfully, so I think it's a good tool when used properly. Like any other graphical user interface test automation tool, the main risk that you have to manage there is the risk of maintenance issues coming up with the scripts that you've created. Many times they are not necessarily unmaintainable, because that implies cannot be done, but what you get is you get situations where the cost of maintaining the script starts to get very high, and the effort associated with doing that starts to drown out any effort available for new development, and that ends up kind of killing off the automation when that happens. So you have to really watch for that. Let's see. Mike asks, what programming language would be most valuable to a tester? Well, certainly, I mean, whatever programming language is being used on the product that you are testing would be the ideal one to know, because that puts you in a position to be able to actually read the code and participate in code reviews and all other sorts of good stuff. So, that's, I would say, look at the languages being used on your particular application and start with that. Shoshana says, could the siloing be managed with increased integration testing? Yeah, certainly if we go back to this guy here, I mean, that's one of the things that's being done basically to de-silo is you've got iterations delivering, and I should point out, by the way, that this only showed one sequence of iterations, but there's actually parallel sequences of iterations going on, different components. So you've got these different iterations dropping into this and the system integration test, and that is helping to sort of de-silo the situation because it does provide that centripetal force, basically, of eventually it all has to work together. And the same is happening here with the sequence of integration tests that are happening. Let's see. Doug asked, can Agile be defined as a hybrid version of other types of typical testing, such as waterfall, iterative, etc.? No, I wouldn't say that. I think Agile proper is its own beast. Now, what ends up happening is, see here in these examples, that people take Agile and they hybrid it with other stuff, sequential and iterative and so forth, and then create out of that what they want. But I think purists would say, well, it's not necessarily Agile. Let's see. Eric asks, kind of an extensive question here, so I'm going to see the whole thing. What is your opinion on teams that seek to implement true behavior-driven development life cycles where acceptance criteria is automated and must pass prior to the user stories being complete? This model seems to imply that test automation is a joint endeavor between development and testing teams. Have you seen other cases where this worked well with development and testing separated? Well, there's really no reason why in, say, this model here that you couldn't have the tester who's assigned into each sprint working with the developer to automate the acceptance criteria, and I think that would be a good thing. What I'm applying up here, top right, with respect to automation, has to do not with automation of the acceptance tests, but other things such as performance test automation and graphical user interface based functional test automation and those sort of things. So I think it's not necessarily an either-or scenario. Let's see. James has a comment here, not necessarily related to this, but I'll just read it out here. I used your online training course in Advanced Software Testing Volume 2 book and passed the ASTQB Test Manager exam yesterday. Thanks for the great information. You're welcome, James. Is there specific metrics while working on Agile? If so, how are those different from the waterfall model? Well, this is Meganathan. I discussed that earlier in the presentation, and looked at the metrics that are looked at, and I mean, these the metrics they're used in Agile, and it's the ones that are different are the things like the story point velocity. That is somewhat different than what's generally done in a waterfall, though not always. I mean, it's certainly something that I've seen plenty of metrics-based estimation techniques that can be used that are very similar to that. They're not called story points, and they're not implemented in the same way, but it's the same kind of parametric modeling technique to try to predict how long things are going to take. Dejan has a suggestion here. He says, with respect to Jira, implement your own workflow. Yeah, you certainly can do that. The thing that's important, I think, is that you have to have separate workflows for defects versus tasks. Yeah, Kevin's got a comment here, comment question. So what level of detail should you have in your test cases to allow for rapid development? Do you need to keep them at high level to adapt to Agile? Yes, you do. That's something that that is necessary. And again, as I said before, that has a number of skills implications for the testers. They have to be very knowledgeable with respect to the application, what the application is going to do, and really be able to sort of figure out what correct behavior is without having to rely on a lot of detailed test scripts. Let's see, mindful of time here. In my company, testers, this is a comment from AJ, my company, testers have had to transition to become more flexible. Do you feel that testers have less of a test role in Agile and more of a combined role of business analyst, tester, programmer, presenter, organizer, manager? In one sense, testers seem to need to be more flexible in their skill sets than in other teams. I think that is something that happens in certain Agile teams. I'm a little concerned about it, actually, to be honest, because I think that the moving away from testers with specialized testing skills towards testers who are more of kind of a jack of all trades and master of none is likely to significantly reduce the effectiveness of that tester as a tester. They might be able to be more effective in other things that they previously didn't know how to do, but they're going to be less effective in terms of things like defect detection and some of the other important roles and activities that are played by testers. So I think this is something to watch and somewhat of a concern potentially. Let's see. Doug asked, please restate where we can grab the slides from. I cannot find anything here in the webinar that allows for that. Basically, what you have to do is go to rbcs-us.com, and then in the upper middle, there's a resources tab, and you go and pull that menu down and then navigate to the basic library, and you'll find them there. Let's see, a comment here from Jamie, requiring sprints plus all paperwork used in waterfalls. Is, I'm not sure what exactly that's in reference to, but that's yeah, that certainly would sound like something of the worst of both worlds. Is a heavyweight documentation grafted into a situation where things are changing rapidly. Not something that you would want. Kathy asks, are any recommendations how to balance the lightweight documentation when you're a federally regulated company? That can be a real problem or a real challenge, I guess would be the better way of putting it. We have clients that have used Agile that were regulated, for example, FDA regulated, and well, you still have to maintain that same level of documentation, and that does create a tension because how are you going to keep the documentation up to date as things change? That tends to be a big challenge. So, yeah, this is just something where if you are federally mandated to produce and maintain certain levels of documentation, then Agile or not, you're going to have to do it. Question from Derek here. Among RBCS's clients, do Agile-ish practices appear more popular with startups or Fortune 20s shops making mobile applications or web applications? Really, it's all over the map. I mean, we see, Fortune 20 companies using Agile. Certainly, I think a lot of startups are using something that they refer to as Agile. There's a lot of what I called Agile-ish stuff that goes on with those particular organizations. So it does seem to be out and about in widespread use in a lot of different companies. And I don't think it's possible to say, oh, well, that only applies if you're doing X. Okay, well, we have reached the end of our time period here, I'm afraid. Lots of good questions. If you want to the chance to pose any question that I didn't get to, we're going to be running this webinar again this evening at 8:30 p.m. Central Time, and you could check back in during the Q&A period, which would typically start up about 9:15, 9:20 Central Time, and submit the questions. I'd be happy to happy to take them then. To close this session, a little bit more about the resources that are available through RBCS. We do these free webinars once a month, so you can sign up at rbcs-us.com. If you want a special webinar presentation for your company only of this webinar on any topic related to software testing, you can contact us at info@rbcs-us.com or via the website. Sign up for our regular free newsletter, rbcs-us.com. This will get you valuable discounts on consulting and training services, and a regular newsletter that's a featured article on software testing and quality and news about what we're doing. We are on Twitter at RBCS. We're on Facebook, RBCS-INC. Do remember to check your email over the next couple days. You could be the lucky winner of a free e-learning course. You were registered for the random drawing by attending. You can check out my blog, rbcs-us.com/blog, and post comments or email me about topics you want to discuss. And then finally, check out the digital library, the recordings of these webinars, podcasts, and videos. We're on iTunes. You can enter RBCS Podcast to subscribe to our podcast, or you can go out check out our YouTube channel, RBCS YouTube channel. We offer these free resources as a service to the software testing community because at RBCS we are a not just for profit company. This concludes the webinar. Thanks to everyone for joining us, and I look forward to seeing you on subsequent webinar sessions.